Welcome to this edition of Sovereign Nation TV. I'm John Matthews.
And I'm Joe Panzarello.
On this edition of Sovereign Nation TV, we want to take a look at what California can expect to look like post-recall Newsom. In an article published at Business Insider yesterday, ex-Olympic jock Wheaties icon Bruce Jenner, who is now referred to as Caitlyn Jenner by the politically correct crowd, expressed her disappointment that Gavin Newsom will remain in Sacramento as California's governor. I can't believe this many people actually voted to keep him in office. It's a shame, honestly, it's a shame. You kind of get the government you deserve, stated California's most recognizable cross-dressing resident. What perhaps is more indicative as to why California politics is rapidly spiraling down the cesspool of idiocracy than the retention of an avowed status is that a man with perhaps the most publicized identity issues in America, and maybe even the world, got 1% of the vote, equating to 56,355 votes at the time of this reporting. That aside, we need to take a moment to contemplate the truth in Jenner's disdainful commentary on the outcome of this recall election. The question is, how did Newsom pull this off? Well, first, there is already ample evidence that many of the people who voted to keep Newsom in office did so without their knowledge or consent. This is due to the ever-increasing corruption of California's voting systems overseen by inept, dishonest registrars doing the bidding of Secretary of State Shirley Weber, who makes former Secretary Alex Padilla appear almost moderate. Weber, who was a former assembly member from the California 79th District, is an active supporter of Black Lives Matter, a fact too many Californians apparently find inconsequential to the integral nonpartisanship that should dictate the actions of arguably the most influential office in the state. As an assemblywoman, Weber introduced legislation for slavery reparations, a bill that prompted Newsom to form a committee to study this. Weber is also the key player in the implementation of critical race theory in California schools. When she was appointed to replace Alex Padilla, who replaced Kamala Harris, there was not a peep out of the California electorate. We can apply Jenner's indictment here. Californians got what they deserve. Stories abound throughout California of voters who decided to forego voting by mail, wanting rather to vote in person. When they arrived at a vote center or precinct, they discovered they were listed as having already voted. This number increased as we got closer to Election Day, proving the old adage, never put off till tomorrow what you can do today. The blowback from this is an increasingly heightened anger and frustration already being echoed by many Californians. Voters were placated by being given a provisional ballot, which is nothing more than a patronizing exercise in futility, as their vote cannot cancel out the forgery. Even more devastating is that now voters can cast their ballot in any number of ways, all under the guise of simplicity. They can return a prepaid envelope, vote without getting out of their car, or have a mobile unit show up in their neighborhood so they need not expend gas. They can dash out and vote during the commercial break of the Jerry Springer show and be back in time for the next brawl between obese women fighting over a skinny boy. If they do wish to make the efforts to show up in person, they can register and vote on the same day without proving they are legal residents. They can even write their choice on a piece of paper and mail it to the nearest processing center. Yes, disenfranchisement does exist, but it's not due to voter ID laws, racism, or socioeconomic conditions. It is a sad acknowledgement that those with common sense and reasoning are coming to the realization they have been duped and abandoned by their respective parties and are now being subjected to self-serving oligarchs. This is the epidemic America actually faces today. If voters had voted when they had a single election day as their duty dictates, we never would have evolved into a system that now makes it so easy to vote that one not even show up. To Jenner's credit, she is spot on. We got the government we deserve. Second, and perhaps the most disheartening dynamic associated with voting results, is the college vote. Among those who voted to keep Newsom in office, the highest turnout was among the Caucasian college crowd. Among white voters with college degrees, Newsom supporters weighed in at 68%, up from 59% when he was first elected in 2018. This is a testimony to the success of institutional education becoming indoctrination centers that now turn out educated derelicts at epidemic proportions. It is not a good sign for the preservation of our republic. The silver lining is that Newsom's support among blacks and Latinos dropped noticeably. Hispanic support dropped from 64 to 58%. Among black voters, it dropped from 86%, dropped to 81 from 86%. Historically, these two groups are depicted as less educated, but it would seem they are actually proving to be much smarter than those who spend $250,000 for a piece of paper. Third, a dynamic that will most assuredly go largely unnoticed was the number of vote-by-mail ballots that were returned by the post office. This indicates what many of us here in California already know. People are leaving the state, seeking exile and other more friendly environments. Unfortunately, they are being replaced by those who love the idea of someone else being responsible for them. On the positive side, the entrance of Larry Elder into the race shows that statism in California is vulnerable. Elder immediately crossed partisan lines, drawing support from libertarians, independents, Republicans, and Democrats. He put a noticeable dent into the demonic partisan elites who use California as their personal stomping grounds on their way to a national office. Not only did his campaign rankle Newsom and his entourage, but we also saw once again the Republican establishment go bonkers. Wailing by GOP elites, Elder was more responsible for the horrible showing of favorite Kevin Faulconer and perennial loser John Cox, neither of whom garnered double-digit percentages, once again illustrates their disconnect with their base. The downside of Elder's candidacy is simply that he came in too late. It is hoped that he now has a chance to build a campaign that can penetrate the seemingly impenetrable wall of fascism that now controls Californians. It will take a cataclysmic event on par with the election of Donald Trump to turn things around here in the Golden State. Elder may be that event. So yes, this recall effort failed to accomplish what many of us in California desire, to return to normalcy as a state that sees itself as an independent republic. And yes, presently, we have the government we deserve. But the bear has been awakened. Let us continue to hope Californians do not despair, but keep fighting a good fight. Let us pray that God in heaven hears our cries for grace and mercy. And let us strengthen our resolve to never surrender to tyranny. If the word on the street is correct, Newsom will have to face off against Elder again next year when he comes up for re-election. We lost this battle. Let's work together to win the war. When we return, we will meet with William Federer, well-known author and lecturer. We'll be right back here at Sovereign Nation TV. Don't go away.
Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The Declaration of Independence proclaims God-given rights, and we intend to protect them. Working with people like you for over 50 years, preserving freedom and building a better tomorrow. Safeguarding the Constitution by limiting government power. We are restoring liberties, educating voters, and leading the freedom movement.
Independence starts with you and I working together as a team. With our affiliates and your support, we reach in excess of 1 million unique individuals like yourself every month. This website is the catalyst, and you are the energy we need to make a change. On jbs.org, we store a sizable variety of tools designed to get you started. I invite you to consider taking part in turning the tide for freedom, not just for one, but for all. not just for today, but for years to come. We, the John Birch Society, stand to defend the Constitution and Declaration of Independence. What do you stand for?
Well, welcome back to this segment of Sovereign Nation TV. I'm your host, John Matthews, and we have a very special guest with us today, very well known throughout the country. William Federer is a nationally known speaker. He's a best-selling author. I don't know how many books he's written. We'll find out in just a moment. He's president of American Search Incorporated, a publishing company dedicated to researching America's noble heritage. And I've asked him to come on today. He also has a show called, or I guess it's a podcast called American Minute, radio feature broadcast, and another one called Faith and History. I happen to have read one of his books. I like the one about the miracles, the faith miracles throughout history and stuff like that. He airs on TCT television and other stations across the network, including those on DirecTV. And I've asked him to come in. He was in town this week, so we're very fortunate to have caught him. And I heard him the other night at an Eagle Forum meeting, and fortunately he was talking on a topic that's very familiar with me and very one I'm still researching a lot on, and so I thought I would have him come on and we'd have a discussion on that. Thanks so much for joining us today, Bill. I really, really appreciate you taking the time out.
Well, John, thank you for having me.
What I want to do is I want to discuss a concept that I ran into a couple years ago doing research for my book. And it was originally designed or originally created for the purpose of explaining innovation within industrial history. And it was called creative destruction. And the idea behind it is that when we, through innovation, a product will be changed or transformed into another medium of some kind, and the best one I could think of would be the phonograph. We had Thomas Jefferson first had the cylinder phonograph, and then from there we went to LPs, 33s and 45s, 78s. From there we went to cassettes, and then from cassettes we went to CDs, and now we have downloadable music where all you need is a phone. And so the idea of creative destruction is that one aspect of industry is in some ways destroyed in order to create a better format of the former that would become more useful, effective, higher quality, and of course make more money. And as I rolled this idea over in my head, I started to get political implications about the idea that you can take ideology and do the same thing, that you can begin to create a different paradigm or a different way of thinking in order to change the thinking of a culture or a nation, even going that far. And through that, through my research, I came across this concept of what they call deconstructionism, which is what I heard you talk about the other night, and that kind of rang the bell in my head. I said, I need Bill on my show because I want to talk about that. It's something I believe is the tool by which this creative destruction is being implemented in the United States today, and actually at a global level, where we're taking the idea of capitalism, deconstructing it, and then redefining it as something else, all for the purpose of creating a different wealth class, for the transference of the redistribution of wealth from one class to another, in hopes of eventually attaining some type of oligarchy. And that seems to me to be the method. This idea of deconstructionism is being used to implement the process of creative destruction. And I wanted to just ask you, I know you've done a lot of work on deconstructionism. Have you ventured into this concept of creative destruction?
Yes, it's one of the, it goes back to the theory of evolution. That man is progressing and getting better and better, and so the past, and it sort of flies in the face of biblical reality, that man is a sinful creature, and he's not getting better, he's just using more advanced technology to achieve his selfish, sinful ends, and so there still needs to be checks and balances. But the idea of deconstruction, it's a gene editing program for a culture. You take out the old identity, you put in the new. It's a drive neutral reverse. You unhook the train car from one engine, you get it so it's not hooked onto anything, and then you rehook it onto a new one. And so they want to introduce this to the young people. You know, they came to Hitler and said, "We'll never follow you." He goes, "That's okay, I got your kids." Stalin's the same way. They realize that if they can, you know, who gets to load the software on the next generation's brains?
Right.
And they have put themselves in the position of education where they're teaching these kids and programming them. But as far as deconstruction goes, you say negative things about the founders of a country to the point where people emotionally detach from them. And then you get them into a neutral where they don't remember where they came from, and then you brainwash them into the future you have planned for them. And so it's actually a sales technique. So if I was a toothpaste salesman, the first thing I do is I tell you a bunch of negative stuff about the toothpaste you're currently using. It's outdated. It's no good anymore. They found that it'll eat the enamel off your teeth. You're like, "Oh, really?" And you're repulsed by it. Now I have you in a neutral. You're open-minded. What are all the toothpastes out there? Then I give you my pitch for this brand new tartar-controlled breath freshener stuff. So it's a drive neutral reverse. And so they go into the classrooms and they tell the kids negative things about the Founding Fathers. Forget the fact that they gave you a present, and that present is you get to decide what you want to do with your life. You're not limited by a class structure. You're not limited by a caste like in India if you're in the untouchable in the lowest caste. You're not limited by the fact if you're not a Muslim male, then you don't, right? You in America have been given a present where you can decide what you want to do with your life, where you want to live, who you want to marry, what clothes you want to wear. You don't have to wear a burqa if you don't want. You can eat whatever you want. You can eat pork. I mean, and then all of us together decide what's going to happen in the country. So you get to be the king of your life. All of us together are the king of the country. It's a bottom-up form of government. Forget all that. They portray the founders as people that took land from Indians, sold people into slavery, and they were chauvinists, and the students are repulsed by them. Now you got the kids in a neutral. They're open-minded. What are all the belief systems out there? Then you give them your pitch for LGBT or Sharia or CRT or, you know, whatever the different socialism is. And Europe went through this with the French Revolution. It went from a Judeo-Christian Europe with 1,000 years of Catholic cathedrals, Protestant Reformation, Jewish neighborhoods. But then it went into the French Revolution, where it's free sex, anything goes, tear down the past, right? And then now Europe's entering a socialist Sharia future, with Muhammad being the #1 name for newborns, and the Europeans not even reproducing themselves, you know, demographically. And then you look at other cultures. Mao Zedong did the same thing in China, the 1960s, the Cultural Revolution, where he destroyed thousands of years of Chinese culture, the oldest Buddhist temple in China, the Great Gates of Beijing. And anybody that had a Western education, doctors, lawyers, teachers, right, they would shame them, and then they detached so that they could brainwash the young generation into the People's Republic of China. Pol Pot did the same thing in Cambodia. Said 1975 was the new year zero. Everything prior to that was irrelevant. And he killed anybody that wore glasses. If you wore glasses, you could read. If you read, you knew the history. He wanted to get rid of the history so that he could do something new. But it always ends up being a dictatorship. So forget all the rhetoric. Whenever you get the state in charge of anything, whoever is in charge of doling out all the stuff, the saying is whoever controls the purse strings has the power.
Right. Right.
Right. And so, yeah, everybody's equal. Well, who gets to decide who lives in the nice house and who lives in the dumpy house? So somebody dictate, well, whoever dictates that is the dictator. But this idea of deconstruction, it's an intentional way to get people to detach from the past. Then they get into a neutral, and then you brainwash them into whatever future you have planned for them.
I understand completely what you're saying. I have my own little personal slant on it. Like, I look at deconstruction as the process of taking empirical evidence and then tearing it down and then redefining it and making something else. As you're saying, you're putting it saying, well, we just eliminate the past, or we eliminate history, and we put something else in its place. And there were a couple of things just in the last few weeks that hit me that I was not aware of. And I think maybe the beginning process of this, which has been going on in this country now for probably 4 or 5 decades at least, if not longer, was the idea that they removed civics from high school. I had no idea that they had done that, and as soon as I heard that, I went, oh, it's no wonder we have a bunch of flaming idiots running around trying to tell us what America's all about, trying to redefine what democracy is and everything else. But in the bigger picture, what I see this idea of deconstructionism, it's a way of attacking and redefining what truth is. We know, you and I believe that based on our Judeo-Christian values, that there is such a thing as natural law. That each, in my opinion, people have an inherent understanding of what is right and wrong. They don't have to be told. There is an inherent characteristic put within us by a creator that tells us this is right and this is wrong. And that what we've done through deconstruction is that by redefining certain things, terminology has become something different. You know, like it's patriotic now to get a vaccine rather than patriotic of exerting your personal decision not to do it, that kind of thing. And then saying, okay, well, because we've redefined what truth is, we can make it into whatever it is. So you can have 18 different genders now, you know, because everybody has defined personally what that gender means and what it means to them in terms of what makes them feel comfortable within their own concept of their own self-esteem kind of thing. I think one of the things, I'd like to get your opinion on this, I think one of the things that we suffer from in this country in particular is the low self-esteem that comes with not achieving the American dream because we just don't want to make the effort.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's two ways of implementing socialism. One is through fear, the other is through free stuff. And so it's like a drug dealer can take over a neighborhood two ways. He can come in with guns, kill people, and everyone gets in fear and panic and knee-jerk reaction. They surrender to the mob and agree to pay extortion protection money. Or the drug dealer can come in and give away free drugs until everybody's hooked. And then he says, oh, you want some more drugs? You're going to have to sell yourself into prostitution. You're going to have to steal from your neighbor, right? And it's like a hunter can catch animals through guns or through bait.
Right.
And so this is the way they do it. So the fear is they want to get people into a panic mode. And you can look at the list of things that'll end the world. You know, it would be SARS or mad cow disease or the bird flu or, you know, all these different things. And of course, none of them have happened. And then you edge into the area of the Machiavellian idea where you create or capitalize on crises to consolidate control. So instead of just having a crisis and people get fearful and surrender, you want to create the atmosphere of fear and then take away. And the free stuff is interesting. The idea of how they catch pigs in the wild is you put a post in the ground with some corn at the bottom of it. Pigs come and eat the corn, sort of ignore the post. The next day there's two posts, next day 3, 4, and you just keep throwing the corn out and the pig, and then you got like a half circle. And then you start closing the circle until pretty soon there's just a little, they can squeeze through it, but they just squeeze through and eat the corn. And one day you shut the gate. Right.
That's the same concept of putting the bear on a chain and letting him walk around, and then at some point in time you can take the chain away and the bear won't walk any farther out. Are we talking about the same type of thinking?
Yeah. And so this is the idea of building a dependency in the people. They call it the Great Reset, mm-hmm. where you intentionally bankrupt the country mm-hmm. so that everybody has to come to the government and say help. Then the government says, okay, so let's say all the people that are on fixed income and these trillions of dollars of stimulus and infrastructure, it's not designed to stimulate. It's not designed to strengthen the infrastructure. It's designed to put so much cash out there that the purchasing power of your dollar evaporates. So all these people that are on fixed incomes are like, I can't survive. And they go to the government, help. And the government says, oh, we're the nice politicians. We're going to help you. But you're going to have to get this shot. You're going to have to get this other shot. You're going to have to get the booster. You're going to have to do this. You're going to have to sign away your rights, sign away your freedoms, give up your guns. You're going to, you know, and so they backdoor you into socialism by getting you dependent on the free stuff.
Where do you see what's taking place right now in terms of the vaccines right now here in LA County in particular? We are facing finally that final step where they're coming out saying, okay, well, they're not really vaccine passports, but they really are. I mean, you don't have to get the vaccine. You're just not going to be able to do anything if you don't get the vaccine. And I think, you know, copying back on Gavin Newsom's claim one time, as California goes, so goes the rest of the nation. And I think that we've become, in many ways, the model or the experiment by which all this stuff is being implemented. Do you see this? Do you see them being able to achieve this to the degree they want, or do you see at some point in time the American people finally waking up and saying, "Okay, enough is enough"?
I pray the American people wake up, but the 33rd governor of California is Ronald Reagan, and he warned on using healthcare to institute socialism. So he said that there's the traditional way of instituting stateism or socialism is through medicine, is through a healthcare crisis, because it's easy to disguise it as a humanitarian project.
Right.
Like nobody wants to speak out against what's not healthy, and so you create this panic. And so he was obviously looking back to Hitler, and so in Germany they instituted universal health care. Government pays for everybody's health care. Okay. Well, then their economy cratered and they had to cut useless expenses from the budget, like keeping alive retarded, insane people. I mean, they don't even remember their name. How are they going to, they're not going to, and then they call them Lebens und wertes Leben, life and worthy of life. Then they got rid of the elderly in institutions. Nobody visits them, nobody's going to miss them, and they've already lived their life. Then they got rid of the criminals in jail. I mean, why should you have to suffer to pay to keep this criminal on? Then they got rid of the bums, the street bums, the beggars, the poor. I mean, they're not adding anything, and they're a drain. And then they decided to notch it up one and get rid of the inferior races from the human gene pool, and they considered Jews, Gypsies, and others in there. And they did the horrible Holocaust. And so we're like shocked at this Holocaust of them killing people, and we're like, it all started with nationalized health care, of backdooring people into being dependent on the government, and then the government can gradually tighten the screws and push their agenda.
Just building on that, with the time that we have left with you today, I wanted to get your take on this. We talked just before the interview about my belief that when people talk about communism and fascism, they talk about two extremes. You got the left and the right. My personal belief is the extreme right is anarchy, and anything else that's totalitarian is on the left, regardless of what you call it. Do you see, or maybe you can explain to our viewers within your words, the similarities between communism and fascism? Because I see them as the same thing. And I get a lot of rebuttal from people, no, this is, we on the right, we're the Nazis. And I'm thinking, I can't even process that. So do you see a similarity between communism and fascism?
Yeah, so real simple. If you think of all governments on a spectrum, a line, and one side is total government, the other side is no government. Total government power keeps concentrating into the hands of fewer and fewer people, eventually a dictator, like the Lord of the Rings, where Gandalf tells Frodo, always remember, Frodo, the ring is trying to get back to its master. It wants to be found, right? And then he goes on to say that I would use this ring to do good, but through me it would yield an evil power. It's too great to imagine. And so this idea that fascism, socialism, it's all moving in the direction of fewer people controlling businesses, controlling government, controlling lives. And of course, even Lenin himself said socialism is a transition phase to communism. Right. And Karl Marx says communism can be summed up in one sentence: abolition of private property.
Right.
And fascism is the government beginning to, of course, it doesn't get rid of capitalism, but it co-opts it.
Right.
So it's basically the government taking it over. So whether you call it or not. But the other side of the spectrum is no government. Now, no government would be anarchy unless each citizen is taught the law. So the first illustration of this is ancient Israel. They come out of Egypt where you got 2,000 years of pharaohs, and for 400 years Israel has no king. But their model of government was that the priests would teach every single person the law. And I was trying to think of a way of explaining this. Imagine if everybody has a behavioral app on their iPhone. Instead of a GPS app that you can get from here to there without anybody else in the car telling you, you can do it all by yourself because you got to. Imagine a behavioral app that tells you how to act in real time. Right? It senses your blood pressure. Don't lose your temper at this person. It's right. Sees you eyeing something on the table. Don't alert. Don't steal that. Right? So it's a behavioral app, and the Levites were the computer geeks that help you to download the app. Right? Line upon line, precept upon precept. Now everybody in Israel had this app. They all had the law memorized. But the big question is, why would you follow it? What would motivate you to follow an internal moral? Well, ancient Israel had the key ingredient. There is a God who is watching everyone. He wants you to be fair, and he's going to hold you accountable in the future. So you're about to steal, nobody's around, you know you can get away with it, and then you think God's watching me. He wants me to be fair, it's going to hold me accountable in the future. Maybe I should hesitate stealing. And so it creates something in your head called a conscience.
Right.
If everybody in the country believes this, you can maintain complete order with no police. Right? So you take the power of a dictator king, you separate it into the hands of the people, it's chaos, and unless the people have internal morals, but what motivates them to follow them is the God of the Bible. Not the Islamic God. Right? The Islamic God says it's okay to kill infidels and rape women and so forth. The God of the Bible says, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Right? So when we say it's one nation under God in America, it's more than just a nice little acknowledgement. It's the awareness that there is a God who's watching, wants us to be fair, and holds us accountable, that motivates everybody into having self-control, that you can maintain order with no police. And so you have maximum freedom.
That I've always believed that the very premise and foundation of conservative thinking is placing enough value on the person as an individual, knowing that as long as my relationship with God is right, then collectively society will be preserved and maintained. We've been talking with William Federer, and I want to give you just a couple of moments here to promote your website and all you do. You've got just a wealth of information out there. So if you would just take a moment, you can let the audience know how they can find you and promote whatever you want. This is your time to shine.
Well, thank you. Well, I have a website, AmericanMinute.com, AmericanMinute.com. I send out a free daily history email, and it is all kinds of stuff, French Revolution, Genghis Khan, it goes through all the history, a little snippet for every day of the year. And then I've been sharing today on information out of a book titled Socialism, The Real History from Plato to the Present, subtitle, How the Deep State Capitalizes on Crises to Consolidate Control.
I want to thank you again, Bill. I know you're busy. I know you did a bunch of interviews before you got here. I appreciate you taking the time to come here. And I hope maybe the next time you're back in town, we can have you back. You know, maybe when you write the next book.
I'd love that. I'd love that.
Thanks very much.
Thank you, John.
Stay with us right here on Sovereign Nation TV. We'll be right back.
Bluehost makes it easy to take your big dreams to new heights. With exclusive WordPress plugins and themes, so you can create a website that feels like you. Bluehost. Transcend the template.
Welcome back to Sovereign Nation TV. I'm John Matthews.
And I'm Joe Panzarello.
What we want to do at this point, I think it's important as our topic for the day primarily is to talking about what California is going to look like post-recall Gavin Newsom. There's a lot of disappointment right now out there that the desired results didn't quite pan out the way that it was supposed to pan out. Right. And a lot of it has to do, there's several indicators or several reasons for that we can look at. And I want to take the time on the panel with Joe today to kind of just mull it about, kind of mull it over, chew on it, what they used to say, chew on the cud, you know?
Yep.
And see if we can come up with some reasonable explanation as to what happened, because certainly, Joe, all the indicators show that this thing was going to go in our favor, that Newsom was going to be replaced. And I think the thing that bothers me the most is not that he was able to retain his seat. I mean, that was possible, right?
Right.
It's the margin by which he did win, and that is what's really bringing things into question, because I believe that is by design to try to kill the morale, the momentum of the movement that has been happening here in California.
Right.
When this recall became front and center, when it actually, I think even that in and of itself, I guess we can kind of start with that. It was a massive success in the fact that we were able to get the recall on the ballot.
Absolutely.
Attempts in the past were really, it was like almost null and void, but the ability to be able to actually get the signatures, I think the final tally was 1.8 million. I hear different, 1.6, 1.8. 1.6 was required. And it was over 2 million that actually signed. But for some
That's
reason,
right.
they decided to actually obey the signature verification law so that they could cancel out as many as they could. Not like
Right.
they didn't do during the election itself. But
Right.
your take on it, just the beginning, just as we break into this, the idea of the overall numbers in terms of what the gap was between what we kind of figured it would be compared to what it actually ended up being.
Right.
What's your take on that?
I mean, at this point, John, especially in California, if the results of a race are close, that means we're on the right track.
Right.
Okay. But, post-election with this recall, when the results were Gavin ended up showing 2 times as many votes, and he won by this 2-to-1 margin again, that was the first red flag, of course, that went up. All right. And going into it, like you were saying, the support, the overwhelming support of Larry Elder as a candidate was immense. And he had the ability to reach out to people and connect with people with his radio talk show and his radio station. He was on countless interviews
Right.
with social media and the mainstream news and everything like this. And he was the guy to get the word out in a very short period of time leading up to the recall. And just the fact that we were able to accomplish getting those signatures, and the fact that it was also based on a lie from the beginning, because the media was trying to convince everybody that it was a Republican takeover.
Right.
It was this Republican recall, which in fact it was not, because I understand a third of the signatures were not Republican.
Right. Well, actually, a third of them they were able to identify as Democrats.
Right.
And we're not even talking about independents and no party preference people. We're talking about
That's
a
right.
significant number that, that just indicated that, yes, Newsom was the brunt end of the anger and frustration in California was being felt regardless of partisanship lines and party
Exactly.
lines and stuff like that. So
Exactly.
that was the, I'm glad you brought that up, because that was probably, to me, the most significant indicator that when we were kind of trying to predict what was going on. I thought, my personal thing was, okay, well, if he stays in office, it would be a 48 split. He'd take maybe 48% would want him out. He needed 51% to get out. And I kind of was always weighing it out like, okay, I knew they were going to try to engineer it. That much was painfully obvious.
Yes.
They've now got the vote by mail process down to an art. And
Right.
I thought, okay, the thought was, is Newsom going to want it to be close
Yeah.
to give the appearance that he can come out and say, okay, I hear you, now I'm going to repent and be a good governor? Or was he going to try to blow everybody out and with the idea of, yeah, again, as you were saying, this is nothing more than just a Republican a remake of Donald Trump. We can equate this to the Capitol 6 insurrection riots, the whole 9 yards. That seemed, so I guess that's the avenue that they went down. We're going to make everybody understand that this was just a bunch of upstarts, just a bunch of people that just don't appreciate fascism,
John, they started from the beginning. They first had Elizabeth Warren doing the commercials for Gavin Newsom. Then they brought in Bernie Sanders, and he did a commercial. Later on, they brought in Obama. He did a commercial. They brought out Kamala Harris to stump for Newsom. And if it did any good at all, I don't know, but bringing out Joe Biden
Well, you would
to
think that
stump
would
for
have
your
worked the other
campaign,
way.
you would have thought, right? Okay. But it was just unbelievable, the desperation that they ended up showing. And the only thing that Gavin Newsom could do to defend himself was character assassination on Larry Elder.
Now, you hit on something there, and this is probably one of the key points that Californians need to look at, because the Democrats are already talking about this being the model by which they will all run for re-election.
Right.
The idea that when you read the actual recall language as to what the allegations are, why we're having this recall, not at any point in time did Newsom ever address a single one of those allegations.
No.
It was immediately the identity politics, and I guess the Democrats are just so, heart and soul into this idea that if we just keep the people divided enough, that we'll end up actually winning by default, or a type of political bullying kind of thing.
Right.
If you didn't vote, I know Biden, they pulled him out of the cellar at the last minute and put him out there at a fundraiser or something.
Right.
And he made some comment, well, if you vote Newsom out, then you're voting Trump in. And I think one of these people out there made some accusation calling Larry Elder was the blackface of white supremacy. And I'm thinking, well, that's kind of a slide turn of phrase,
Right.
I know I don't know how many of our viewers follow the Babylon Bee. Have you ever read that publication?
I don't think so.
Well, they're kind of like the Onion. They do satirical articles.
Right.
And they published an article of Larry Elder in high school at a prom, and they said, this is a picture of Larry Elder wearing blackface in a high school prom. And it was like, that was just, to me, just so indicative of how ridiculous the identity politics has gotten,
It is. And that's all they had, John, was
Right.
They had to paint Larry in a way that he was, number one, an anti-vaxxer,
Right.
and number two, that he was the equivalent of Trump.
Right.
He was Trumpism. He was a Trump supporter, this and this. So there was nothing else that they could talk about, because there is no success story that Gavin Newsom could have pointed to that he's done well or somehow benefited Californians.
Well, he did twist some things, and this is actually something, I want to step back at the beginning of the COVID.
Sure.
And when we first went into our lockdown out here, and they started the mask mandates, and then they started limiting
Right.
access to indoor establishments and stuff like that. And I remember in a conversation with some people that I was talking to, and they're like, well, where's this going to go? And I said, you guys really don't see what's happening here. Newsom is going to use the lockdown to drive California into bankruptcy so that he can get federal dollars to bail us out, and then he'll turn around and tell us that he balanced the budget. And lo and behold, the only thing he addressed in any way, shape, or form was the fact that California has a surplus in the budget now, and it was because of the injection of the COVID
That's
money.
right. The COVID stimulus money.
Right, and then
Right.
he had to have another $20 billion to cover the unemployment fraud that was taking place in the state.
Oh.
To keep the books balanced. So
Right.
he's using federal tax dollars to supplement or to make up for the shortages in the California budget, which is primarily brought on by the number of unions that we have. And people retire, the pensions,
Really?
that's everything. In the school pension, it's not for the kids, it's to keep the pensions going.
That's
because
right.
These teachers get 10-year tenure, and then they retire and they draw a pension, and
Right.
so those are the kind of things that nobody really paid attention to, because it all came down to, okay, we don't want another Trump. Well, that in and of itself I find kind of paradoxical, because Trump in the last election actually did very well in California, relatively speaking.
Sure.
Vote-wise, I think the record shows Hillary only beat him by 3 million votes, and it was the highest turnout in California ever in terms of people turning out.
Right.
So even in defeat, Trump accomplished something that other Republican candidates hadn't done, is that he got a significant number of votes. So
Absolutely.
these kind of things get lost, though, in the day-to-day conversations, because most voters just really don't want to have to spend the time to actually recall. It's like
Right, of course. And, they tote that too. When the leftist campaign and Gavin Newsom they said things and they incorporated that very thing into the commercials, that it's going to cost the taxpayer $86 million or something like that to have a recall election, you know. So they make it look like these evil people, these evil Republicans are taking more of what you have, you know, kind of thing.
Yeah.
But you did a great job talking about a lot of the specific discrepancies with regards to what happened with the votes.
Yeah, there was a whole slew of things, and some of the stuff, I have to be honest, some of the stuff I can't really bring out in the public now because it's tied in with my work with the Election Integrity Project.
Right.
So we've been asked not to speak about certain things because of the ongoing lawsuit. But we do know, I can tell you this, we do know that in this election cycle, we had nearly 4,000 incidences reported of different things that were going on. Everywhere from
4,000.
polling
Incredible.
problems to the processing. A lot of the stuff is dealing with the processing, the actual ballot processing, and how it was conducted. And but then when you look out in the media, this is an idea that I really want to start entertaining in the conversations that we have. When we talk about voter fraud, I think that's, you know, that word, that phrase in and of itself is very negative. And it has a tendency, people just right away think extremism. When you say, okay, there's voter fraud, that kind of thing.
Right.
I'm starting to think of it in terms of voter suppression.
Okay.
Okay, so when
Right.
the process and everything begins to suppress the outcome or make it very difficult for voters to vote the way they want to, for instance. We
Right.
had so many people, reports all over the place of people showing up and wanting to cast a ballot in person and being told they'd already voted. Well, that's
Exactly.
straight manipulation of the vote-by-mail system. It's possible to do that.
Right.
That kind of stuff that took place, which I think will, in the coming days, flush itself out, and people will become more aware of that.
Right.
And if I could, though, let me just shift a little bit to the numbers involved in this recall,
Okay.
because I think it points to the bigger problem, in my opinion, of the disconnect, particularly between the Republican Party and its base. Now, I don't know, I have not been able to ascertain whether that disconnect is intentional or not. I have a
right.
tendency to believe that it is, because the Republican Party, the leadership has kind of adapted this attitude that we govern by not governing. You know,
Sure.
it's complicity and complacency,
Status quo.
and not having to go on the record.
Right.
You know, that preserves our standing amongst our base. And that in and of itself is kind of perplexing to me. But the big uproar that I'm really paying attention to right now is the fact that the Republican leadership is blaming Elder for the loss because it took votes away from their poster child, Kevin Faulconer.
Right.
Now, Faulconer in the polls, if polls are to be believed, we know that they're becoming increasingly more unreliable.
Right.
But if they are to be believed, Faulconer never had more than a 6% take on the ballots to begin with, and Cox
That's
was
right.
even less.
That's right.
And yet he comes in with under 10%. I think he was at 8%. And
Right.
I've got here Kevin Paffrath, I guess is how you pronounce his name. He's a Democrat.
Yep.
He was actually second in the voting at 9.8%.
That was behind Larry Elder. Correct?
Yeah, Larry Elder, who took 48% of the vote.
Incredible.
And here's, you know, so the Democrat came in second, and Faulconer came in third with 8.3%, and Cox is down with Caitlyn Jenner. I think
Right.
it was like 2%
Right.
or
It was-
something like that, okay? So they never had a snowflake's chance in hell of winning in the first place. And rather than just own up to that, it's, oh no, it's all Elder's fault because, as they put it, he retreated to the fringe. That's the phrase I heard by one of the people, is that he's too conservative. That was the paraphrasing, is that Larry Elder was too conservative. as a Republican to conservative. And so it just kind of points to me this disconnect of the idea that, okay, I guess in the Republican leadership mentality, it's okay if we win, as long as we win the way we want to win, which means we win and then don't have to be accountable for anything that happens after that.
Sure.
And would rather stay in the minority, actually, because then you can blame everybody else for it. I mean, I think Mitch McConnell kind of echoes that mentality. What do you think about that?
I think you're right, John. You know, we've seen that in past elections here in the state. It's been something that has been very frustrating for Republicans and conservatives in California, and it has contributed to one of the main problems with regards to voters in the state. You mentioned that, yes, there are a lot of voters, Republicans, leaving the state, but for those who are staying here for their families, for their careers, for other reasons, there is the danger of this discouragement setting in and this disappointment with the election system, and they keep going back and they keep going back and they keep being told that their vote matters and you got to get out there and vote and this, and we keep getting these setbacks. And so that's the dangerous thing that we're facing right now, is that with something like this recall, there's going to be more voters out there that are just going to throw in the towel and say, you know what, my vote doesn't matter, I'm not voting anymore, this and this. And that is a really dangerous area to be in.
And that's actually kind of took place in this election. The number of Republicans that did not show up to vote is very noticeably significant. Even John Cox acknowledged it. You know, he says, well, we just have a lot of very unhappy Republicans. You know, he understood that. So I want to take a moment here and throw some numbers out there so that our viewing audience can kind of get a grasp of what we're saying.
Absolutely, John. But just briefly, you talked about a disconnect there between the Republican Party and conservatism in the state.
Right.
Yeah, that is a huge problem, because what the GOP should be doing is getting behind the most conservative person, the most constitutionally minded person, and the one who comes in with true solutions to these problems. And that was a Larry Elder in this race.
Right. It just happened to be that he's the one that was immediately able to cross the lines and bring in people. And I was thinking, one of the things I hear from a lot of Republican operatives, some of the dogmatic, we'll go down with the ship kind of people. I've had several of them quote to me from William F. Buckley. When William F. Buckley was asked, how do you vet a candidate to run? And he said, you pick the most conservative candidate that can win. That was his philosophy. You pick the most conservative candidate that can win.
Right.
And Elder fit that to a T.
He did.
And yet they wanted to go with this moderate who was pro-homosexual marriage, pro-abortion, because in the words of some of the leadership out there, the way I'm paraphrasing, the idea was that Elder was so conservative that he would turn off everybody in the state except the conservatives, and there aren't enough conservatives to make a difference. So we're going to compromise what we believe in the sake of winning.
Right.
And then the question always comes, well, then once you win, where do you go? If you win on moderate or you win on liberal platforms, what do you do when you actually get in office? You're forced to do one of two things. You're going to be one term if you follow the conservative ideals.
Right.
Or you're going to sell out and you're going to become what it is you say you're not.
Right.
And, I'm going to throw some numbers out here to our viewers.
Yeah, please do.
San Diego County, they had 1,983,790 ballots issued. About 42% of them have been returned. Now, when you break that down, Newsom won 56% of San Diego County in 2018. Joe Biden won 60% of San Diego County. So if we take that 42% that were returned, you take 60% of that. There aren't too many Republicans voting in San Diego County. I want to throw a couple other numbers up here. For the sake of time, I'm going to drop down here. Orange County, which is just south of us here.
Yes.
1.8 million ballots issued, 41% return. Now, Orange County had the largest turnout in terms of the counties.
Right.
But that's 41% voted out of 1.8 million, okay? So if you look at that, in the 2018 governor election, Orange County had 50% of the vote went to Newsom. John Cox had 49.9, so there's a very small margin there.
Right.
But the point being is that with the voter fraud, you could have reversed that thing in a minute if the fraud was proven, whatever. Point being, Orange County, which is supposed to be the conservative bastion of California,
Sure.
40% of the people showed up to vote. That's an indictment, and it proves the disconnect that even though we had somebody like a Larry Elder, a lot of Republicans
Right.
just chose not to vote at all.
Right.
And that is, as you said, a very dangerous pattern to establish, because at some point in time, the vote really isn't going to matter if it continues down this path.
One of two things has to happen, John. Either you have to have a candidate, now like a Larry Elder, a lot of enthusiasm came from people as soon as he announced that he threw his hat in the ring. You either have to have somebody who's an off-the-charts, awesome candidate that people can get emotional about and excited about, or a more grim possibility is things have to get so bad and everybody has to be negatively affected by something. It has to get so bad to wake those people up and finally get them out of their houses to vote.
Well, that's what we really kind of had been thinking that the recall movement was. It was that bad, catastrophic event, the COVID and everything else that was coming down the pipe, where people just finally said, I don't care if I'm a Democrat or not. I don't care if I'm a Republican or not. We need to get rid of this guy because it's damaging everything. Everything that's in the state is just, it's in peril right now. It's just hanging on. And I really thought, okay, and I do believe that we did get to that place. I do believe that, if the numbers were different, if we're able to prove the numbers are different down the line here, a lot of what we documented this year will be added to the lawsuit that is currently pending in front. And we have all the hopes in the world that this ends up in the Supreme Court before the 2022 election. That's our goal right now. Now, if that information gets out into the public domain, that might be the catastrophic event that everybody goes, wait a minute, you mean my vote really wasn't counted the way that I cast it? And that means that they're actually taking away my representation? And, that may be, we're hoping that something happens here.
Right.
As we close up here, Joe, I wanted to get your take on what do you think we do from this point on? What's the game plan from this point on?
Election integrity, of course, is the key. And you've got great organizations like the John Birch Society, Eagle Forum, Election Integrity Project California that are working diligently on those things. I mean, the motto of Election Integrity Project is to get everybody's votes cast legally and everybody's votes counted accurately.
Right.
And without that in place, without that integrity there, you don't have accountability, you don't have a constitutional republic, you don't have representation, John.
Right.
So the emphasis has to be on the horse in front of the carriage, and that is election integrity.
Right. I agree 100% that is the cornerstone of our republic. If that deteriorates and is eroded, then the house falls. There's just no way about that. The other thing I would offer is that now what has to happen is that Republicans, not necessarily the leadership, I'm talking about the base, the people that are out there working their precinct projects and trying to get people to register to vote and out doing their thing, fundraisers and the whole 9 yards.
Right.
I believe the time has come where you need to literally put your partisanship and your party membership off to the side and say the object of the game here is to get a candidate that represents our principles and values, and no matter where he comes from, it could be a Democrat,
whatever background.
but if he or she is that candidate that represents us, we all need to throw our weight behind that. And we need to, and now you can go back to your partisanship afterwards, but let's get the job done first. And I think that's the biggest challenge that the Republican Party faces today, is the base looking at the results. You know, Larry Elder took every single district in California. Every single district. Nobody else came close.
That is incredible.
57 districts, I think. Well, we might have more than that now. Congressional districts. I think
Right.
we have 57.
Right.
Every single district went to Larry Elder. Now that tells you something. And
Absolutely.
if you can't see the writing on the wall, then God help you. As Bruce Caitlyn Jenner said, you're going to get the government you deserve.
That's right.
You know, and so having said that, I'm going to close up our segment here. And as Joe mentioned here, you definitely want to check out our websites because we're carrying all types of information, much more than what we're talking about here.
Right.
You have Election Integrity Project, which is EIP-CA.com. It's very simple, EIP-CA.com. JBS is very simple, jbs.org.
Right.
And Eagle Forum, you can go to any number of the websites. I always recommend doing the Orange County website only because it's the most developed right now.
Right.
That's eagleforumoc.com. And you get all the up-to-date information that's going on.
And John, don't forget to send people to The New American, thenewamerican.com. That's the separate website for The New American. And we've just got some great news that this year there's over 36% increase over last year with the people that are reading this magazine and subscribing to it.
I've become hooked on this magazine. I mean, I'm totally addicted to it because the articles are so concise, and the people that are writing are just phenomenal in terms of, actually you don't read the articles and think that it's coming from any particular biased point of view. It's just these are the facts. This is what's out there. This is what's going on. Right. And the objectivity of the articles and the writers in this magazine have just blown me away. It's hard to find that kind of stuff anymore. The only other publication I could think of that's even close is Epoch Times. Right. You know, it's on par with that. So it's very, it's relatively cheap to buy.
Absolutely.
You know, better than Good Housekeeping or Cosmopolitan,
Right.
That kind of thing. And you certainly don't need to be spending your money on National Enquirer or anything like that. So we want to thank you for taking the time to tune in to this edition of Sovereign Nation TV. Visit our website, sovereignnationtv.com, and you can pick up all our archives of all our past shows. So we will see you next time, and God bless you, and God bless America.
Long ago, up on Bunker Hill, they fought for freedom. Oh, yes, they did. Our founding fathers, they rose up to that call and rallied to the fight for liberty. We the people, one nation under God, fighting for freedom and justice for all. We the people, one nation under God, must say